Hello everyone, greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about inequality and why it matters and what we in civil society should be doing about it. It's appropriate that I'm talking to you here on Gwigwi Mwebi Street, the street where CIVICUS has its headquarters, because this country, South Africa, is one of the most unequal societies on the planet. And every day that I've lived here, the reality of that inequality has been really stark. You can see it. You can see it in the disconnect between the high-rise buildings behind me of one of the biggest and most vibrant economic centers in the country, but then the housing projects up the street where people live in abject poverty. Here we are in South Africa, home to some 50,000 people who have personal wealth of more than $1 million US. That's 70% of the continent's millionaires. But this is also the country where we have 15 million people who live on less than $1 a day. It's also where 1 in 4 people go to bed hungry. This is a country where inequality is so stark that those of us in civil society have to be reminded about the importance of fighting this scourge. In fact, I would go as far as saying that inequality is going to be one of the defining challenges of our generation. We know that over the last few decades, the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, has actually been increasing. And I think when historians look back to our period of human history, they will ask the question, what did we do to correct the widening gap in inequality? They'll also ask what we did to end extreme poverty at a time when the world is so full of resources. And of course they will ask what we did to save our planet from disaster. But amongst our key challenges, I think, we do have to think about inequality. For me, there are 2 key things about inequality that we in civil society need to pay attention to. The first is the economic inequality that so plagues our world today. And the second is the inequality in power, the inequality in opportunities, the inequality in life trajectories that we also have to address. On the first, I think we know what the challenge is, and I have a feeling many of us, especially those of us who work in the development sector, are doing our best to correct some of those gross inequities when it comes to the distribution of money and wealth. We have to do more to redistribute the amazing resources that we as a humanity have in a more fair and equitable way. We have to do more to correct the injustice of so many people living in abject poverty at a time when so many live with such extreme wealth. But the second aspect of the challenge, the inequality in power, is perhaps the more difficult for us in civil society to grapple with. You know, if I look around the world, there are some big challenges around there about the distribution of power. You know, we're in a world where power seems to be concentrating in a few. The political and business elites in our societies, whether they're in Finland or whether they're in South Africa, seem to be colluding to stack the rules of their game in their favor. And unfortunately, the sort of institutions that we've built to combat this don't seem to be working. At the national level in many of our countries around the world, we don't have political institutions that are delivering social justice, that are really engaging in participatory democracy so that all of us can shape our collective future. Instead, we have institutions that are perpetuating and deepening inequalities. If we look at the global level, we have some serious challenges there too. We have global institutions that were built in the 1940s and are perpetuating power and power dynamics from that era, so that a few wealthy states that used to control the world still dominate the international agenda. So if we are going to attack some of those big global challenges, we need effective institutions at the domestic level and at the global level, and we have to have radical reform to make these institutions not just more effective, but more accountable. When we look within civil society, I see some challenges around the distribution of power as well. We've seen some big changes in the way that geopolitics works and the way that economics works globally, with a rise of new powers. The economic and political landscapes are changing rapidly. But if we look at whose voice is heard within global civil society, who gets the resources, then my fear is that our landscape is not changing radically enough. We still have deep inequalities between civil society organizations, often in the north, but not only in the north, who control resources, who have access to policymakers, who have the ability to have their voice heard, and then a whole bunch of other civil society actors, including grassroots organizations, but also informal social movements and the other bits of civil society that aren't so good at leveraging donor funds. And so I think, like all of us who are trying to fight the good fight, we have to have our eye both on the goal that we want to set, but also the process of how we want to get there. I think we have at least three things that we must look at and pay careful attention to if we are going to address inequality in economic distribution, but also inequalities in the power distribution. I think the first challenge for those of us in civil society is to challenge the systems that seem to be driving deepening inequality. Many of us are great at making some changes here or there. We're great. We've designed fantastic institutions to address the issue that's close to our heart. We fight child poverty. We improve access to education. We fight for gender equality. And I have the privilege, working at CIVICUS, of traveling the world and meeting some amazing activists who are making a real difference in their communities and in their societies. But my fear is that we're losing the battle against inequality, that the big shifts that are driving these changes, the collusion between political and economic elites, we're not making a dent on those things that matter. And so, just as we have to make those small changes, we have to keep an eye on the big changes, the radical changes, the systemic changes that are necessary to deliver a more equitable outcome. And so I urge all of you in civil society to keep up the good work on the issues that you're working on, but bear in mind what more together we need to do to achieve systemic change. We cannot afford just to trade in incremental change. We have to have our radical vision and pursue that as well. The second challenge, I think, is around looking at what more we can do as civil society actors. And to me, the big challenge here is about reconnecting with the communities and the people we want to serve. For many of us who are lucky enough to be paid for doing the things we believe in, and for those of us who are working in professionalized or bureaucratized non-governmental organizations, there's a real responsibility to go outside of our buildings and to engage with communities, to be more than just tokenistic when it comes to consultations, to go beyond what I call insultations, where we co-opt people so that we can get more money or get more visibility for our cause. We have to be real about building those linkages with the communities that we serve and the people who we claim to represent. And only by being more accountable to our beneficiaries, and not just to our donors, will we we become more effective civil society actors, but also will we become more effective in fighting inequality and injustice around the world. So I urge all of you, even if you're in a Finnish non-governmental organization that has nothing to do with the so-called field, you have to do more to diversify who you talk to diversify who works for your organization, to broaden your membership base if you have one. All of us in civil society, I think, have to get better at walking the walk, not just talking the talk. The third thing that we have to pay special attention to is building global solidarity between civil society actors all across the world, in the North and the South, between big NGOs and small actors, between those of us in organized civil society and the rest of civil society. Because I think the only way that we can challenge power or speak truth to power is to be better organized ourselves. And part of that will be about getting rid of these old neo-colonial divides between the North and the South, the donor and the recipient, the grant maker and the sub-grantee. We have to be able to be real about the connections that bind us. And I think, as the world changes, that's going to become easier, not just in terms of communications technologies, but because some of the challenges that face us all are universal challenges. Climate change is a great example where, regardless of whether you're in Johannesburg or Helsinki, this is going to matter. And so for those of us in civil society trying to build solidarity, then we have to build the linkages between people, activists and organizations in all of these places. But we also have to do this if we're going to overcome some of those tired politics that sometimes plague civil society actors. One of the things that we try to do at CIVICUS is to build these meaningful dialogues and meaningful relationships between civil society actors all across the world. And we encourage all of you, whether it's in your national platform through Kepa or in the work of your own organizations, to do more of that solidarity building. So, on behalf of my colleagues at CIVICUS, I hope you have a productive day of discussions. I hope I've convinced you that I certainly believe that inequality is one of the most fundamental challenges facing humanity. But it's not just the distribution of economic resources, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, between the rich people in their boardrooms up there and the poor people who live in the housing estates down there. But it's also about the distribution of power. And for those of us who are in civil society, we have a responsibility to speak truth to power. We have a responsibility to challenge that inequity in voice, in power, in influence. And the best place to start, I believe, is within our own practice. That we have to close the gap between the boardrooms and the streets, between the professionalized NGOs and the everyday struggles of people around the world. If you want to know more about our work, please visit civicus.org, or please talk to someone from Kepa, who are one of our most important and active members. In particular, I urge you to read an open letter that about 40 civil society leaders signed and distributed to our fellow activists in August of this year. It's a clarion call to us all to not just trade an incremental change, but to stand up and fight for the radical change that needs to happen around the world. Thank you very much, and good luck.